This is maybe a little bit easier for you to see. So yes, we are going to use Prismacolor pencil on this Valentine Typewriter, and it's very planar as we look at it. Let's look at a side view. Let's look at a front view of it. So orthographics really kind of help here. It is a longitudinal rectangle. Trying to get the proportions of that will be part of the game here. If you look at a side view of it, these are better viewpoints. You can actually see the geometry a little bit. You can see how this angle for the keys is a different angle from the angle of the actual housing. And again, just like the Macintosh that we did earlier, we're not going to try to draw individual keys. We're going to draw these keys as kind of a prismatic shape as a whole. That's going to be an easier approach. So. And then here's a viewpoint of kind of the proportions of the typewriter itself to the case. And again, the case we're going to put at a different angle, much like you did your iron, a different angle to the Valentine, probably to one side or the other. I'm going to let my Valentine typewriter kind of dictate later where that goes. And then it fits in the case, something like that. So this view is not terribly useful, except it is important to realize that the inside of the Valentine is thinner than the back, and the back is essentially the lid once this all folds up. So it seals off the top of that. So everything that is the Valentine fits inside that case. Any questions before we get started? Okay. I'm trying to decide, do I want to draw this left or right? I would say at the moment, also this particular photograph, you'll see that this lever right here is kind of flipped out awkwardly. We're going to draw that more or less in line, so don't worry about flipping that out way to the side like that. It actually nests in here and folds up pretty well. So I'm not sure why it was flipped out like that for that photograph. But which side should we draw it from? You know what, just to be different, I think I'm going to change viewpoints. If you want to draw this from this side, you can. If you want to draw it from the opposite side, you can. I think I'll draw it from the opposite side just to get a different view. You know, choose your viewpoint. But the trick here is make sure that you bring enough, leave enough room somewhere, offset it one direction or another to leave enough room for the case. Okay, so let me see if I can fold this up and allow it to stay kind of close by here while we sketch. I don't know, the orthographics in many ways are better. I think in a lot of ways seeing that right there is very, very beneficial. Let's break it down real quickly and let's just see how wide this is to its height, because I don't usually do this. I usually just start drawing it. But in this case, let's take just a moment and let's figure out how many squares this is, or roughly, just to get us started. If I'm estimating over, I'm just saying that's about one square, that's about another square. It's not quite 3 squares, but close, just a little bit less than 3 squares. Probably close enough that I could make it 3 squares, to be quite frank. This is not terribly precise. So let's start with that. And I'm gonna go freehand straight up from this and see if I can back out of this a little bit. And this thing is just collapsing on me. I can't use this. Oh man, hold on. Equipment is failing this morning. All right, drafting dots. I need somebody with some drafting dots real quick if you got some. Thank you. Let me pause. Okay. The light would help, but sorry, we'll go with this. So I've got about 3 units wide that I've got to go in that dimension. Let's see if I can leave it up there and try to get my paper mostly on the page. And I'm just going to start this like I do most others, with an angled perspective that's going to give me some depth. And I'm going to probably try to put this typewriter a little bit to the left. I will say this too, this particular drawing for me is pushed. I really am having a hard time wanting to draw on this size paper. I want to go one size paper bigger, but due to the camera I can't do that. I can't fit a bigger pad here and actually pull that off. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out just a little bit more to get it out in front here a little bit. So I'm going to make this my front corner. If you want to draw it from the other side, that's fine. But I am trying to get to this. This is the important thing, is building that rectangle on a face. If you wanted to make it face this way, you could totally do that. It's not critical which direction you draw this. Okay, now I need to estimate. This is fairly thin. It's not too thick. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of put in a top thickness that represents more or less my, you know what, I don't like this already. I've offset it a little bit. I'm going to go back to my original vertical line. Go back to right here. That gives me a little more room. Now I need to decide how many squares I have here. Here's 1, 2, and a little less than 3. So I'm going to say that that's about it. I'm going to strike this back. I am speeding up today, folks. Keep up. We ought to make this a 20-minute sketch instead of an hour. How wide is it, or how deep is it? If I look at this viewpoint, well, let's look at this viewpoint, because this shows me kind of the depth of it. It looks to me like I might have, I'm going to make this front corner of the housing my front corner, not my keyboard. I'm going to make my keyboard come forward. So go ahead and do that. Oh gosh, you know what? I think I'm going to extend the rear off too later, because it's a different shape. So I'm going to keep this lower, and I'm going to say, you know, square 1. This is just really quickly estimated. It's about 2, it's almost less the same amount of the third square going depth wise. So the main body, less the keyboard and less this rear flange, is pretty close to a square. It's really close to being 2 3/4 units. Really, really close. So I can do the same thing over here. I can say, well, let's just finish that out to be cube. There's 1, 2, and then less than 3. Is that about right? Might have gone a little light right there. Yep. Everything making sense so far? It's about 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. So no matter what angle you're drawing it at, 2 3/4, 2 3/4. That's the critical thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and start laying in rear lines that kind of give me the rear part of this box. I'm going to go ahead and draw in, I feel like I'm just drawing this way too small, but I'm going to go ahead and proceed with it. Usually draw this almost twice this size. This box now represents essentially the body of this, less this flange that's on the back that steps out, and less the keyboard. I haven't started with either of those yet, but that helps me, again, get this right. Somebody came up yesterday or day before with the iron, and again, we're struggling with just getting the block proportions right. And I think, again, a lot of your drawing, hey, just bear with me and be quiet, okay? Think about your thoughts instead of speaking them. So here is the idea is trying to get this block just right, and don't try and get into the details until you get this block right. And again, I keep you hear me and you chuckle when I back up and hit reverse and back up and move around. Well, that's because I'm sitting here tweaking the block, trying to get that block right. I've probably drawn it a little bit wide on this direction, but I can correct that kind of as I go. So here you go. You end up with a block that's roughly something like this, and I'm going to add a rear flange, and I'm going to add the keyboard forward. Now, let's look at this angle. Let's look at the angle here and say, well, what is that? That's a pretty steep angle compared to a lot of the other angles I think we've cut back from. You know, the iron angle was kicked back a little bit, and the Macintosh angle, this is almost half of a square. I mean, it's leaning back a good bit. So, you know, if I'm kicking this back here, I'm going to say that angle is probably hitting from here to here. I'm going to draw this keyboard facing right, and let's go ahead and draw that angled plane, and then send that all the way across to your vanishing point. Make sure that converges. Make sure those lines are all converging to that vanishing point. Bless you. Then I'm going to kick that angle out again. Now technically, you know, I actually think I missed my point out here a little bit, so I'm going to pull that back just a little bit, but technically this angle should open up compared to this one, right? The one that's further down the path here should open up. So that's about what I would expect to happen. And I'm liking the block in. I'm feeling like the block in is kind of working at the moment. What next? Gosh, what should I draw next? I could go on and do my prism for my keyboard. Maybe I should. Somebody's got an allergy in here. Dust blowing around. It's all the little eraser bits, right? So, I tell you, I think I am going to work on the keyboard. It's out front and center. Let's go on and get to it. And this is going to be a prism. A prism is a triangular type shape that's extruded, right? And so what I need to do in order to define that prism is to figure out first kind of its boundaries top and bottom on this surface I just drew. So I need to see kind of what this window is of keys that step out. They don't go all the way to the top and they don't go all the way to the bottom. They're kind of housed vertically in this window that steps forward. You'll also notice just one discrepancy, okay? These typewriters are about $500 today. They're highly collectible. So if you go out on eBay and you try to get one, you're going to spend some money. I bought mine for $15 in a junk store 20 years ago, and that was a great find, but it's broken. So the photograph you see here on the right is mine, the one that's sitting right in front of you. The photograph that you see here is the one in the Museum of Modern Art. It's complete. Can you find the difference? That little red rest is not on this. I'm trying to show you this so that you don't get halfway into this and get mixed up on a point or something, because the photographs that I've got right here don't have that little rest. It actually is a little round rest that comes forward, and it's actually kind of nice. It's back in the ABS color, so you kind of brings that red back out to the front of the typewriter. We're going to draw it with the rest on it, but I'm still not going to draw that rest until I get the keyboard going. But I wanted you to kind of see that difference. That is a distinction between the photos that I've taken over here of the one that you see on the table versus the actual production unit. So we'll get to that in a second. But I'm trying to get the keyboard first, and I want to lay this in, and I'm going to put a top boundary on here that really just kind of represents that distance. For me, it's a little easier to see it on that perspective view. You could also look at it right here, that distance. So I'm just going to drop down about right here and start that window or that prism. So it's estimated. I just put it in. Where does it finish? Well, it drops down pretty low on the bottom, but it's kind of the same thing. There's a line down here on the bottom that represents the height of that window. And I'm kind of looking and eyeballing. And then the left and right margins. I'm going to go ahead and put them in. Remember, they're angled. They follow that angled plane. And I'm going to do one here on the rear that's out there. And remember, it diminishes a little bit. So I kind of have a rectangular window now that becomes a starting point for the prismatic shape that I'll create for these keys. If you try to draw each one of these keys, particularly straight off the bat, it would drive you crazy. And you'd probably get them all out of alignment and they'd be going everywhere and mess your drawing up. So we look at the boundary of them instead. So what is the boundary? They more or less step straight out. There is a little bit of a curvature here, but for the most part they step straight out. See if I can kind of sketch over this. And there's an angle. Again, this is a perspective photograph, so it's cheating me a little bit, but it's essentially doing something like this. You see that shape I kind of drew around the outside of the keys? It's got some shape like this, and then that rest that I don't have on this particular unit steps down just beneath this and is kind of coming forward. And it's actually, I think, more in line with the bottom of the typewriter. I think it kind of finishes out this way. So there's a rest that's right here. I'll color that in. That kind of comes out and has a connector that comes back that we don't see. But it's something like that. So I'm gonna kind of try and replicate that, stepping forward. I'm gonna actually use this lower line first to kind of do that. Say, well, this comes forward. Already had that line there. That comes forward probably, I don't know, maybe that far. Kind of looking at that, bringing that over.
Did you buy it broken?
I did, yeah, it was broken when I bought it. It was totally the worst junk store I've ever walked into. It is disgusting. And I got a nice deal out of it. I had never laid eyes on a real one. I'd only seen them in books, and I was like, I know what that is. And they don't. So, actually I'm going to bring this forward just a bit, just the width of a key, and then step it forward so that I end up, it's technically not a prism, it's I guess a trapezoid or something, but it ends up being a triangular type shape. And let's extrude that all the way down. And you end up with something like that. And I may go ahead while I'm here and try to, let's look at this perspective view here a bit, just to look at that rest, because I'm not as familiar with that rest. It's not on mine, and it's got to step out kind of proud of the space bar and all of that stuff. It doesn't stick out proud of the actual typewriter though. So if this drops, if this was, actually I had this original box I had started to draw that I ended up backing up from, is actually a nice starting point perhaps to start to consider the back end of that. And then there's a thickness here building off kind of the bottom of this. I'm growing this keyboard rest or hand rest from the bottom rather than the side, just to kind of make sure I'm there, because it does actually stick out a good bit. You can kind of see it sticks out a good bit from the keyboard. It's going to go all the way to this line that's out here. Whoa, that looks a bit far. Now that I get it out here, I'm questioning it. But you know what? It actually does kick out a good bit. So I may just pull it back just a little bit, just for eyeball's sake, but not necessarily go against what my construction said completely. And then put a little thickness in there. So again, just replicate that thickness and I'll put radiuses on here in a second. I haven't done that yet, and then that rolls back, and it kind of rolls back underneath. I may have stuck it out a little too far, it's possible, but it's close. All right, that gives me a start. I'll come back and make that look better in a few minutes, but now I know it's there. I'm gonna now start to work on kind of the rest of the typewriter. I think the next thing to put in is actually this rear flange. So This is kind of the back cap. It's actually seen almost best in this top view, I think. You can kind of see that it steps out considerably from the side. You know, that width and that width are off, you know, it's probably a good, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch, ½ inch. So I'm gonna step that off. How am I gonna do that? Well, I'm gonna come back to this back plane that I've already drawn here as the back of the main part of the housing, and I'm just gonna do an offset. I'm just gonna do an offset thickness that steps out. What you can't see that's underneath this typewriter is that it does actually have a little bit of standoff feet. It has 4 little feet that are probably close to a 1/4 inch stand off the ground, so it actually elevates the whole thing slightly, which is not uncommon for products to have that. So this flange doesn't actually go all the way around it at the same height, but it goes most of the way around. It goes the top and the 2 sides. I need to make sure I'm getting convergence here because I don't feel good about that. And it comes back underneath just slightly, but not the whole offset. And then I end up adding that flange thickness rearward. Remember, no radiusing yet. I'm just putting on my boxes still. And again, I seem to be struggling to get convergence out on that right side. I keep trying to tip these lines up for some reason. So make sure those drop down properly. That feels totally wrong, actually. I need to dive that some more. I'll fix that in a second. So now I've got the rear flange. And I don't like it, actually. I don't like it. I missed those top lines and they're really bugging me. But I'm gonna radius these things out in a second. I think it's gonna make it look a little better. Okay. Most of the boxing is done. I think before I put any radiuses on, and they are fun to put on this product, but I think before we do that, I'm gonna go ahead and try, you know what, I'm not. I'm gonna put my radiuses on, it's time, let's do that. That's fun, and I think the cutout is actually easier to think about once the radiuses are put on. So, the most fun radius we'll start with, and that's let me look at the front face here. Again, I think this is the best view to see these in. You've got a really nice, gosh, that's probably like it's definitely a 1 inch radius. It may be 1 1/4 inch radius put on there on all 4 of these corners. So technically, if you were pulling out an ellipse template, and I'm not asking you to do that, but if you were, you would lean this ellipse template back where the minor axis tips down closer to perpendicular to this line. It's not going to go to that vanishing point technically because technically it's tipped back on this plane. But I'm going to put that in. I'm going to repeat that here and try to hold to the same radius. I'm going to come over here to this side and drop in the other radius. It's going to look a little smaller. The lower corner one I won't see because it's behind the keyboard. And at this point, because I have those locked in, I'm going to go ahead and use my straight edge one time just to connect those and kind of get a good hard line going. I think it's useful to kind of see as we continue to work into the convergence and make sure I'm getting my convergences working the way I want. So that more or less covers the front angled face. And because I'm right here, I'm also going to go ahead and put in this line and use that line I just drew as really the main guide for my convergence. This is going to be the keyboard. And again, if you want to put in interruptions there, you can do that. I mean, again, technically this is kind of, I really don't want to draw those keys. I'm trying to give hints that those are keys, so I'm putting some kind of tick marks along there to give me a sense of that without having to draw it if I can. You know, it's hard to know at what level to back off the detail. Let's step back and look at kind of the perspective view here a little bit. One of the things that happens on this window is it kicks in. See how this rolls around? it comes inboard and then steps. That's a little detail I haven't gotten into yet. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to draw this down. I'm going to say it kicks in probably somewhere in here. It's a small detail, but let's put it in. It shows up, makes my drawing look more accurate. And that actually has a radius on it too. So this becomes actual window of my keyboard, becomes something like this. And actually that becomes part of the carriage that comes out, which I'm not going to get into just yet, but yeah. Okay, back up and rolling. Got my front face, started my keyboard. You know what, I think I am going to go ahead and kind of go ahead and finish or wrap up kind of this front portion and try to make this keypad look about right. It has some radiusing on it. I think I'm going to stick freehand right here just to make it look a little more rounded, which it is. See how rounded this is? And it has a nice radius actually right here on the front corner. And then it kind of turns, it has a hard, almost like a hard radius on the inside, which is a little awkward actually, designerly wise. It's not, but we're going to do that. I'm going to come out here and once again kind of replicate that radius out on this corner of that bar. Give myself kind of that tangent thickness. Roll that edge. And in this case, once again, I think I'm going to use my straight edge to get out there and kind of connect the dots a little bit. I feel like I missed it there somehow. You can see I've missed it. And that rolls around, comes back. And I'm going to do the inside here too. For me, I jump all around the drawing, again, depending on where my quick wins are. Need an easy win. I go for what's fun. That gets me psyched, keeps me going. Sometimes I got to do that. So yeah, for going into the radiuses and kind of working on this, technically there is another piece that actually steps back. It's inside and underneath, so gosh, technically I should see it, but it's going to roll up underneath and go right into there. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pretend that's there. Yes. This right here? Yeah, this is a hole. This is an opening in the plastic from here to here, and then it steps down here and opens up, and then it steps back up. It's kind of like a jogged edge that wraps all the way around, and this is a big window in the red. That no, this is not a shadow. There's actually an opening here in the red. It actually opens up underneath there. Yeah. So, and again, I'm not real worried if you don't get the geometry exactly right on what that keyboard is doing. The important thing is the perspective here. So we want to make sure you're getting your drawing correct unto itself a little bit. And that's, or not a little bit, that's the whole bit. That's the main thing. Proportions, general proportions matter, but we're really not trying to get you to lock in on every little detail here. We're really just trying to get you to draw the proportions and get the perspective right. So I'm going to go ahead in here. I'm going to come back with freehand in here just to loosen the drawing back up because it's feeling a little tight. I'll say I'm going to go ahead and draw the space bar because the space bar shows me kind of the boundary of the keys a little bit, and I end up with a key that's kind of up high and a little bit here, and then these kind of work back up from here. So again, I'm just putting some interruptions in here to kind of give myself a sense of what's going on. It's not totally unlike your space bar on your computer. It kind of works the same way. So, and again, anything I can do to just put some cross lines through there, kind of say, hey, there's the keys. That's what you're trying to do. All right, that gets me started. This rolls underneath, goes back up in there somewhere, don't know where. I may come back and add more detail to that in a minute, but not right at the moment. I'm trying to move forward with the rest of this. So, and the rest of this is continuing with my radiuses here on the back. So if I've got radiuses here, those are going to show up also on this rear intersection. And I'm going to come in here and draw them. These are more fun to draw because they're not on an angled plane. There's one there. There's one on the underneath side that rolls around that I can't actually see the terminus to, but it rolls right there. And there's one way back here on the back side that really isn't going to show up much either, except that it'll keep that from being a point. And I'm going to go ahead and connect the two rear ones here so that, again, mainly so I get that convergence line, because I wasn't liking what was happening up here on that flange. And I'd even say that that line I just drew is still kicked up a little high. For some reason, I'm having a hard time seeing my convergence line here. So I keep adjusting that. Feels like it ought to tighten up a little bit there. I'll go ahead and draw a vertical and connect those dots. And on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and connect these dots. And you can see I've already missed it. I rolled that a little too much. I'm missing my geometry. Do you see how far off this is? Look. This is too low compared to that. Missed it. Probably a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch. Can you see that? I'm off. How do I fix it? Well, I could raise this up a little bit. That would be the easier thing to do because it's over at the rear of the drawing. If I start monkeying with this, it's right up here on my front corner. I'm going to take that front corner and use it. I'm going to cheat a little bit, come out off of it a little bit with that pencil, and I'm just going to back up. So when you see an error like that, and that was actually a fairly significant error on a fairly significant visible portion of the drawing, just kind of fix it as you go. Once I start shadowing and working in here, all that like mess up's going to kind of go away. I won't see it. If I'd tried to fix it up here, it probably would have showed up a whole lot worse. I'm going to continue with my radiusing and put my radiuses on my flange. I'm calling it a flange. It's really not the flange, it's the cap. Technically the top cap of the waste paper basket. And draw that. Now here's the line I got to get right because it's been wrong from the beginning in freehand and I need to tighten this down. So I'm going to sight this real well with my triangle and make sure I'm getting convergence out here like I want, because all these seem to be wrong. And before I draw that line, I am going to go ahead and put that radius out on that corner too, so that I kind of know where I'm landing. But I want to make sure that line's right. Still think I got it a little high, but it's okay. And then there's an offset to all of this that ends up being the back thickness of this line. Nothing magical, just repeat, rinse and repeat. This is where I have to defy all those lines I put in a while ago and cut in underneath that a little bit, because that really was wrong where I was putting all of those lines. See how off those were? This dark one is really where it needs to be. So just keep fixing by hitting your pencil harder on the newer, more correct lines, and then when you hit a mistake or a misalignment, see if there's a way you can kind of fudge it, fix it without causing too much attention to it. Now, you'll notice I actually haven't drawn this rear line dark yet. Oh, and how I want to, but I'll notice here that this cutout actually extends down over that radius here in the rear. So what I'm actually not going to have that hard line continued all the way to the back. It's going to stop. How far does it stop back? So right here is where that plane starts. Looks like that cutaway starts not even halfway down. I mean, this takes up the majority of the top. So if I'm looking back at my diagram here, actually that cutout starts probably right in here. I'm going to give myself a starting point vanishing line going right in there somewhere. And as I cross over these two corners, that becomes really that point. There's a whole lot of mess going on down in here, a whole lot of geometry. I will probably see a little more of this geometry in my sketch than what I see in this photograph. This photograph hides a little bit of it, but it'll be somewhat similar. I don't want to get into all of that. I kind of have to show that there's some geometry there, but I don't want to draw all of it. So there's again, it's kind of like the keyboard. What do you show? What do you not show? In order to kind of know what to show, I'm going to start over here with this section of the carriage. So this is kind of neatly cut out. It's a little bit of an interesting, again, almost trapezoidal shape with a knob that runs on a cylinder. The cylinder is what holds your paper. So I'm going to go ahead, let's see if I can keep that one in the field of view a little bit for you there. And I'm going to go ahead and draw, for reference, kind of where this cylinder is relative to the side. And again, for me, it actually ends up showing up pretty close to where that where that line was. So I'm going to go ahead. Where does that ellipse minor axis go? Right vanishing point. Minor axis to right vanishing point. Might be a little bigger than what I drew. Maybe something like this. There, maybe in there. And that stands a little bit proud, so it's actually going to come this direction, just one material thickness this direction. Stands proud of the housing. And then there's this kind of trapezoidal, mostly planar shape that it's attached to. Has kind of an angled shape. And I'm looking at this. Y'all don't look at my drawing, you look at this shape right here. This is what you're trying to replicate. And get the proportions on that close. I think I made mine a little bit too tall. I think it's or not tall enough. Comes like that. Like that. Comes back. Has this kind of weird jog. I might not even draw all of that jog. It's kind of, I'm not going to draw all that jog. I'm going to just draw some of it and kind of say, it's like that. And then I'm going to extrude that shape to the right because that's actually kind of a thickness. It's actually a cast part. You wouldn't know that looking at the photograph, but that particular part is a casting, meaning that it's kind of like molded out of metal. And all of that should be kind of inboard of the radiusing that I'm about to do. I don't want to draw that too dark yet because I'm going to come back in here and put some more radiuses on. I now have to look at what's happening here. Now this gets a little tricky. I've got this, let me draw this line. This cut comes down at an angle, rolls just past that radius, then cuts at an angle again and radius is down underneath and goes all the way to the rear. So this is a big cutout. Make sure you're looking at how that cutout works. And we already kind of have a line for where that cutout starts. So I know it'll be dropping back from that point. But I also know that this is happening on a radius. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this radius again, even though it's not all going to be seen. I'm going to kind of draw that same radius. That radius is extending all the way down if that shape was continuing. And in this case, that cutback really almost, it's like you took that radius, you started it, and then you roll it back at a slight angle. And then it comes flat for a little bit. That right there. And then it's going to drop at an angle. It's actually going to look very close to vertical. Bring it back just a little more. And it comes back at an angle something like this. Then rolls underneath at another radius and goes all the way back. This is that big window. Comes actually all the way back to that in there. What's it doing up on top? Well, this line continues over to right here, and then it steps in one more time. I'm going to draw the step in first so that I'm ensured that I'm on center. I'm going to estimate center right there, strike that back to my vanishing line, which is right there, and I'm just going to put my jog right about here and here. This is a small jog, but it actually is a nice detail to include. Let's skip to a little sharper pencil here. So that jog ends up being like that. And I can put that little vertical step there, turn that corner back, turn this corner back. All of these follow to your vanishing lines. Draw them in light first, makes it easy later. Technically that rolls just a little bit. I never see a corner right there. And I can draw the first part of now that rear line that kind of rolls and blends into that tangency. And I'm going to continue that over here. There's a material thickness. Oh gosh, can you see it? Is there a viewpoint? I don't know that you can really, I don't know that these photographs fully show. Yeah, kind of. This top view kind of shows it, but it's so small. The material thickness of this red right here it's thicker than a 1/4 inch. It's more like a 1/2 inch, but maybe not quite a 1/2 inch. And so that thickness gets replicated right here. You would see that step back to that thickness. It's inside that beautiful ABS plastic. And then that also shows up right here, that thickness. So I'm just replicating that material thickness through that window right there. And now I've pretty much got most of the architecture of my red plastic parts. I want to go ahead and put a few more details. I'm switching back to my dull pencil here because I don't want to be too precise with this. I want to kind of show there's a cylinder. Actually, let me just show you the physical thing. This is where the photographs are starting to get a little muddy. But if I look at the top of this, that knob that we created on the side is almost the same diameter as the roller that's on the inside. That's a true cylinder, that black roller that's right there. It's pretty much like you took that knob and just extruded that cylinder all the way through it right there. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put that, well, what little of that cylinder I can see. I probably can't see the whole thing because of where it is, but I'm going to go ahead and take that line and carry it across inside there. Now I won't see the part that's behind that casting, but I'll get to that in a second. I would also see that cylinder as it shows up on the other side, so I'm going to make sure that you come back and draw that other ellipse back out here in space, because it's going to show up just a little bit on the outside of this. I might, because I got so many straight lines going and I want to get this right, I might actually use my straight edge here to make sure I hold true. Might not be a bad idea. So there's my carriage, a little bit low. Try again. Not carriage, my roller, whatever you, paper roller, whatever that's, I should know the official term, but I don't. And you're going to see that roundedness out on that outside corner, even though there's also a casting that's stepping out here too. So this is actually going to show up similar to what I drew. You can, if you want to trace those lines over, you can. I might put a couple of lines in here to kind of give me a reference for where that was. Drops down, cuts back, goes underneath. I get it started and then I'll come back in and kind of get it more accurate. There's also a plane back here. Again, I'm going to do one little plane just to have a plane that's at an angle that's technically the paper carrier, but you know what? Make it up. Make up whatever contraption is going on in there. Make it kind of fit and look like it belongs in this heavily extruded kind of environment that we have here. And then I'm going to come back in and actually put on a little bit of rounds and make this casting look like it's standing proud, which it kind of is. stepping out just a little bit from all of this. And I probably need to darken up my ellipse lines now there too, so this drops back. And I can just come in and darken a few of these lines. And what it kind of indicates is that, man, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. I don't really know what the inside of a typewriter should look like. There's all these pieces, but I'm just kind of showing it as a contraption. And maybe that's enough. Maybe I don't have to draw all of that stuff, just like the keys. A little shade right there. It'd be nice to knock that down. Okay. Yeah, this ellipse I need to tighten down and get this right. So I had started this a while back. Let's go on and make this knob look better. Go back to my sharper pencil here because I'm losing a little bit of a tip. This is where my smaller drawing is hurting me here. If I had a little bit larger drawing, I could keep my pencil tips a little fatter. It's kind of a little bit football-y. Don't want it looking like a football, so I put a little shadow on there. Shade that up. Yeah. No, I'm good. I've got two different sets here. I just have to switch between them. All right. Gosh, what else? You know, this is, it's got a couple of little, this doesn't show up in the photography, but there's a couple of little antenna ears that show up here in the back of the carriage. That's kind of a nice little detail. You don't have to put them in there. I'm gonna, because I think they look cute. They're kind of paper supports that flip up, at an angle. This wasn't unique. A lot of typewriters had these. They're little. I've actually drawn in my hard lines already, so these are gonna be a little bit wrong because they're, unless I shade them or something, which I might do. There's also some other stuff going on in there, but I'm gonna go ahead and kind of use some shade and shadow to darken some parts to try and accentuate really the lines of this. The housing is what's beautiful about this, not really the internals. You just have to show enough of the internals to kind of get a sense of oh, okay, that's a typewriter. And I will go ahead and add a little cylindrical roll shade to that cylinder just to have it look a little cylindrical, and put a little shadow down in that recess right in there, just to make it look that way. Technically it is black, so it's gonna be darker than everything else a little bit anyway, but there you go. All right, there you go. What else is there? There is the waste paper basket. There is coming back and hitting a few of your lines harder, and maybe again, wherever you have a cylinder, it's nice to do a little shadow roll like that, just to kind of say, hey, it's going underneath. Might even do a little bit back in here. I feel like I'm forgetting something before I move on to the waste paper basket, but I think I might shade these just because I missed it on those lines. I should have put those in first. I will shade those only to knock those lines back. Otherwise, they're actually made out of metal. They're bright finish, but what else? I could hit these lines a little bit harder up front here, and I think I will, just to show kind of the bottom of that keyboard. Or keys, I should say, not keyboard. And oh, Valentine, the logo. This is really cool. So beautiful typography, actually. Let's see if I can get up a little closer here. Molded in typography, not pad printed on, screen printed on. No data label here, no sticker. This is molded in type. It's beautiful when it can be done this way. If you see castings a lot. A really nice casting might have its detail molded in like this. like the Electrolux, I want it to be there, but I don't want to get too bogged down in every letter. So that procedure of kind of abstracting it, figuring out, well, how big is it? That mark is about that wide, that big. Make it a box first, just like I did. And I'm gonna say, all right, center line of this, I had already drawn. That box for the Valentine is about right here. It's right there. It's on your, you see it. You don't need my drawing. Look at the photograph. Look at where it is, not where I draw it. Hopefully I'm drawing it in the right spot. But you're getting what's called stack up error. If you copy everything I do, I may compensate for a mistake I make and not even tell you, and you might not compensate for it and get you in trouble. So it's best if you look at the photography, at the object itself, and draw it in. There it is, there it is. And now I gotta go in and just kind of pretend like, just do a few key things. And again, these are kind of, it's all lowercase. Now in this case, one thing that's different from the Electrolux is that this is all on an angled plane. So the verticals of the letter forms are in fact angled, not vertical like they would have been on the Electrolux. So I'm just coming along and kind of plugging in, kind of round top. It's got kind of round lowercase letters. I think I left a letter out here. I'm not real concerned with it. Valentine, and kind of showing a little bit of this and a little bit of circular. There you go. Does that say Valentine? No. Could you read it? No. Does it look like the Valentine logo? Yes, in a very general way. That's what you're trying to hit. Okay. I think I'm okay. I'm feeling all right with the typewriter. The only thing I want to put in now, I'm going to put a little more shadow right in there just to kind of make that look like a radius. But I need to come back in and put my case. This, to me, is the hardest part of the drawing because the case doesn't have any detail on it. Details doesn't even have a fraction of what we just did. But you got to get the perspective right, and you got to do it to a different set of vanishing points, which makes it tricky. It's like the iron, it's like the books, and honestly, I struggle with it. It's like the mouse on the original Macintosh that we did. It's hard for me. As long as I got one set, I can kind of see them, and when I get two sets, I start to struggle. So, but it is what it is. Let's see if we can do it. See if we can get it in there. I'm gonna put mine behind it slightly because I kind of have to. I want it to, in order to see it sitting on the ground, I'm gonna have to have it somewhere over here, maybe the corner of the waste paper basket. Remember, I want it standing up. So it's going to have to be kind of sticking out maybe over on this side a little bit. I just physically don't have the room on the whole drawing to put it to the left. I could put it over here, but I think I might just, for interest's sake, make it stick out. So it's going to be behind the typewriter and slightly to the right just because of my page layout, really. So in order to do this, I'm going to come back and look at, again, this base footprint that I drew. I need to be building and thinking about my perspective almost like I'm starting the drawing over again, because I essentially am. And I want to draw this front leading edge of this waste paper basket at a slightly different angle than this. So it's sitting at an angle, and it's going to stick out kind of over in here. So in order to start that drawing, I'm going to actually just just draw a first line, kind of a random spot that's going to stick out. So in this case, I'm not really drawing, I'm not really feeling convergence or perspective necessarily. I'm starting a first line, but I tell you what I am going to do. I'm going to come back here on the back side and continue that line as if it is going all the way across there. because I need to feel that convergence. This is going to be hard to feel. The next line I'm going to draw, let me show you the box itself. So look at this for a second. The waste paper basket actually tapers slightly. It's not totally vertical because it had to be molded and you had to pull the steel of the mold out of the middle part. So it actually has about a 2-degree draft. That's very typical of molded parts, is a 2 to 3 degree draft angle, it's called. So I'm going to start it vertical, but I'm actually going to have to lean it out. I'm going to start with a line, and for the sake of being consistent here, I am going to go ahead and put this, use my straight edge to draw a good vertical line, and then I'm going to angle this out just a little bit to kind of indicate that draft angle. I'm being a little precise here just because it's so easy to kind of mess this part up. Because this waste paper basket is angled with its face a little bit more towards me, this side is going to diminish very, very quickly. This is going to be moving very, very quickly. I know that'll be a hard angle. I think before I do that, I want to go on and estimate the full height of this. So this is tough to do, and I'm going to just visually estimate it because it's set back from this. It looks like it's going to end up being 6 or 8 inches, or maybe even further back from this. So it's going to look smaller than the typewriter, even though it's bigger than the typewriter. It fits, the typewriter fits in it. But I'm going to go in here and put another vertical in that I think estimates kind of the width of it. And then I'm going to kick out an angle there that kind of represents that draft. In fact, that angle should show up more. Actually, that draft angle on this leg is going to show up more distinctively than this one because of the particular perspective. Now, here's another thing. I haven't yet drawn my rear convergence. This is when I really have to commit to the perspective. I also can tell from my viewpoint, Shay just fudged it again because I'm not going to see the top of this. It goes beyond my paper. This waste paper can is actually taller than where my paper is. This ends up being a good thing for me because I don't have to show it. It's one line I can't get wrong because it's not on my page, right? So this is not a bad thing. Let's go on and darken in kind of the width. I'm going to go off page. Bleeds off. In fact, this adds interest to the drawing in a way. It kind of makes the drawing look a little more interesting to have something bled off page like this. And back to this lower line. Now I'm going to come in and give myself a little bit more visible line there to make sure I'm there. And then I have to kind of decide where this is converging to. So for me, the easiest thing to do is to look at where my convergence for my typewriter was, try to estimate where that horizon line actually is. And if I'm measuring the convergence, let's see if I can get the whole drawing in the view here. If I'm measuring the convergence of these lines, they're kind of estimating it. I would have said that my finger's just off camera here, that maybe convergence would have been right in here. I would have said horizon line is probably in this neighborhood. Wouldn't you think, based on kind of what we're looking at, that the horizon lines, let me draw the horizon line. Let me look at this side and see if the convergence this direction is working the same way. And I feel like that convergence would have met, and of course you can't see this. I'm kind of coming way out here and saying, well, it would have met somewhere probably in here. Again, if I took that and carried it over, I'm feeling like horizon line is somewhere right in this neighborhood. Now to this point, I've never plotted a horizon line. I've actually never really thought about it, but I've tried to get the convergence right, and somewhere in this neighborhood is where that horizon line is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it because it actually does give me, actually it's going to add a nice detail to the rear of this drawing. It's going to look like it's on a infinite table or something, or sitting on the desert floor at you know, out in the salt flats or something. So But it does give me a sense of, I know that the convergence of this does have to hit on that line. So it gives me something to think about as I'm trying to hit this, what I think is quite awkward to try to hit this. So I'm going to do my best here to preview it and say, all right, well, what should this be? Should I come back and draw this rear corner and see where that falls? Yeah, maybe I should. Let's do that. I'm going to drop down through my typewriter here and make sure I can see this is intersecting right about here. And if I was seeing the footprint of this, where is this going to converge? Oh, interestingly enough, this is actually lining up over here. Let's see. And I know it's going to kick up harder and faster than where it was on the typewriter, so I know it's going to be up higher. Let's just start by freehanding this a little bit. Let's see where it might be. Is it there? I'm not going to see a whole lot of this. Is that too extreme? I'll see only a little bit of the back side of this. Doesn't feel right. Doesn't feel right to me. Maybe it's a little too extreme. Maybe it's more like that. And if I was carrying this off, this would come over real hard. It actually would almost fall in line. It would be that one. And I'm kind of sketching what the footprint of this would be on the ground. And it would be converging that way. Is that right? And that's kicking out. I don't think that's quite right. First of all, I think it's too deep. I think I made it too deep. Come back, thin it up a little bit. That looks a little better. It's a little thinner. I'm going to go with that. And then I'm going to put these big fancy radiuses on it like I did the typewriter, because again, this case is radiused in a similar way. It actually has a detail that runs up the inside, which you can see in this one good photograph. This is the only thing good about this photograph, is the side of this has a recessed detail in it right there. I don't know if you can see that, but that is going to show up kind of in my drawing right here. And again, it moves up at an angle. This does not go all the way to the top, but steps in, steps out, rolls around. It's doing all this funky stuff inside here. Now, because I'm above the horizon line, what's going to happen to this detail? This detail is going to now tip back down, and it's going to tip back down where these were converging, which is right about here. I can actually draw it that way. It's kind of an extreme view of this. And this goes on up. Actually, it almost would be. I may have drawn it a little bit too tall, but maybe it's a little higher. Maybe I just didn't go quite high enough with it. Maybe it's something like this. Converge down a little more. And this is a radius here, a radius corner here, so I'm going to put a little bit of a contour line in there to indicate that. And then I actually have two kind of extensions of the buckle, kind of these step downs that are going to show up here in this case too. So these are details. These are going to look a little bit more vertical. I'm going to go ahead and put those in. And again, they make the most sense because you can break, it allows you to kind of break the material here and show this interruption in the form down here on the edge. So this is where I think it actually makes the most sense. The bottoms of that I won't see, so I don't have to draw them. They're behind the typewriter. I am going to come back and thicken that line up a little more. I'm kind of questioning whether that case is too tall. I think it's okay, actually. I think I was actually estimating height of this wrong. Technically, it might just start to become changing right there, but I don't think I'm going to see it, and that's good for me. That helps me out because I don't actually want to draw all that anyway. I'm just really trying to show this, and I'm going to go ahead and put in a real light, accentuate that horizon line in the background. I saw a number of the GeoCities that didn't actually include the horizon line as a object line or as a finished line. You know, if it's part of your scene, make sure it's there. And most of the time it's not, but occasionally it is. And in this case, I think I'm going to include the horizon line. I think it adds a little bit of interest, and so we're going to make this floating on an infinite piece of glass, like a advertising photograph for the Olivetti 1969. And you should be just about done. We still took way too long on that. FRE 22. Put a thickness in on those just to kind of show there's something there. Case is, it's actually easier for me to see here now looking back at it. Case is a little bit big. I was probably trying to compensate for the fact that I knew it was going to look too small because it was back in the back. But yeah, that case is too big. The case should be a little thinner. Actually, maybe the width of it's not too bad, but the thickness of it is still too deep. Can you see that? Given the extreme perspective of it, the thickness of that case, this distance here is still a little bit too deep. I was probably trying to compensate for that distance back, so. But it's not too far off. And I think it adds a lot just to the composition to have it going off page like that. It actually adds a little drama, and even putting in the horizon line I think grounds this and makes it look like a real perspective drawing. So, Valentine Typewriter, Ettore Sottsass, Perry King.